Steph. I decided to document my journey trying to lose weight after having gastric bypass. And I chose to document this journey mainly because I haven't seen a lot of videos on YouTube that specifically details the hardships and the struggles that some patients may have. So I wanted to kind of give my perspective and all the struggles that I have had in hopes that it may be beneficial to other people that are struggling. So just as a trigger warning, this will be talking about some pretty in-depth things, including weight, body image, eating disorders, and things like that. So just want to give everybody a heads up. So starting from a young age, I struggled with my weight even as a child. I remember being really young and having come home from swimming all day, eating a bunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and having comments made about, like, are you going to eat all that? I wanted to be the smallest I could be, and trying to achieve those kinds of body images, I would end up purging, but unsuccessfully purging. So even back then I had issues with unrealistic body standards and purging to try to achieve those standards. Age 16, I got pregnant. I ended up having my son when I was 17. And as with any teenage pregnancy, that's a lot to try to cope with. But I was definitely using food as a coping mechanism to deal with all of the disappointment. My son's father wasn't in the picture up until the last month that he was born. We lived in 2 separate states, and there was issues with just him being older and me being 16 and legal issues and stuff like that. So he didn't come back up to where I live until right before my son was born, and there was just a whole bunch of stuff. So I turned to food as a coping mechanism. Then after my son was born, the first couple months were definitely hard and restless nights, and then I went back to try to finish my high school diploma, and I was pretty much a single parent in the sense of I was responsible for waking up in the middle of the night to take care of my son while going to school. So I turned to food as a coping mechanism. So what baby weight I had lost, I had gained all that back, plus 20 to 30 pounds by the time I went back in for my 6-week follow-up appointment. And the weight just continued to increase to that point until I got to probably 20 pounds heavier than what I currently am now. And that's the highest I've ever been. And then after years and years of that, trying to get my weight under control, having hormonal issues, then experiencing like severe acne, I ended up losing my period, started to develop hair loss, I got the facial hair, all those things. I fought with my doctors all the time, and I'm like, I just don't feel right. I find with PCOS, which just makes it harder for me to lose weight. And I get like intense sugar cravings, things like that. So I had talked to my doctor. They put me on medication to try to help with weight loss, and I would lose like 5 to 10 pounds, And then I would have an issue where like my hormones would go all out of whack again. We would try to put on a different medication, but of course with insurance, they only approve so many medications, and a lot of those were experimental medications, especially with weight loss medications. A lot of those insurances won't cover. So my endocrinologist had talked to me, and she's like, have you ever considered gastric bypass? So in July 2017, I underwent a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass surgery. At the time that I had gastric bypass and I was having all the weight gain and PCOS, I didn't have an active eating disorder going on. In a roundabout way, I think all of us that are overweight, we have some form of eating disorder, and we use food as a coping mechanism in a roundabout way. But like I wasn't binging, I wasn't purging, anything like that. So the first week was rough. I definitely didn't realize how restrictive my stomach was going to be. I ended up having to stay an extra night at the hospital because the first day I only got down an ounce of water, because my stomach was just so small and I was having such a hard time. So that first meal that I had, I ended up having soup, and then I made the mistake of thinking that I could have eggs with it when you're only supposed to have liquids that first time, which did not go down. And if anybody's had surgery, you kind of know the feeling of what happens when you eat stuff that you're not supposed to. I can't just wait for the food to digest. It like creates like a big giant like ball of food in my stomach. So the only way for me to get rid of that food was for me to purge, which then just created this huge big cycle where I would eat food that I wasn't supposed to. It wouldn't digest, so the only way for me to get relief is to purge, which then developed into a full-blown eating disorder of binging and purging. Along that time, after my surgery, my depression and my anxiety continued to spiral out of control. I've had depression and anxiety for literally as long as I can remember. I remember being a little girl and having issues with depression and anxiety. I have severe social anxiety. I've always had issues with nightmares and things like that. So at the time I worked as a nurse on a floor, and which just continued to fuel my depression. I worked nights, which was hard for me to take care of my son, as I by that time had separated from my son's dad and was an only parent. So it was just a lot of depression and anxiety, which then again continued to fuel my coping with using food as my coping mechanism. And because I could no longer eat that food, I continued to overeat, feel my small stomach, and then the only way that I could get rid of that food was to binge and purge. So by like January 2018 or so, I had like a full-blown eating disorder, and every time I ate to the point that I would overstuff, and then I would go purge it up. And it got to the point where it wasn't, even if I didn't eat to the point of feeling overfull, then I would just purge because I felt guilty about even consuming those foods. Around the time that I had my gastric bypass, I also was diagnosed with frontal fibrosis alopecia, which just made me even more depressed and anxious, because that type of alopecia, it affects my hair follicles on my scalp and it causes my body, it's an autoimmune condition that basically causes my hair to fall out, and then when it does fall out, it causes scar tissue, so the hair won't ever grow back because of the scarring. So that created a lot of body image issues, which again just fueled the depression and the anxiety. So it finally got to the point where in January 2019, I decided to go seek treatment for my binge eating disorder. And then because of treatment, they want you to try to overcome your eating disorder, which means not necessarily following a specific diet, which for gastric bypass is all about eating like specific calories and specific portion sizes, which while I was in treatment, I gained 10 to 15 pounds. So that continued to fuel my depression and my anxiety. And it took me a really long time to get over that binging. Like, I was in treatment for a month and a half, and even when I left treatment, I don't think, like, I know I was not over my binging. To this day, there's still days that I binge. It's just I don't purge like I used to. And that's the one thing, like, it's hard with the eating addiction and eating disorder. Like, if you have alcoholism, you can give up alcohol and abstain from it. Well, with food, like, I physically can't just not eat. So each time I eat something, I have to physically think, like, about my addiction and try to control those impulses and those urges to binge and purge. So it's going to be a lifelong battle that I have to deal with. But in the meantime, since I've left treatment 2 years ago, I have pretty much gained back all the weight that I lost from gastric bypass. I have now developed herniated disc in the back of my C2 and C3. I have a herniated disc in the back of my neck that pretty much has limited all mobility and sense of function for me. So my quality of life is pretty much limited. I do ESI injections as often as I can. I chronically have migraines that I have recently started Botox for about a year ago. But again, we're not sure what is triggering my migraines with my herniated disc. It's hard to say if it's my disc that is causing my flare-ups or if my hormones with the PCOS causes the flare-ups. But I have weeks where I have a migraine every single day, which if you've had migraines, you know it's hard to function and do anything when you have a pounding migraine. I work in an office now as a nurse, so I stare at a computer screen all day, which doesn't help my neck or my migraines, even with the blue light glasses. My diet pretty much consists of eating whatever I want to not limit myself to foods that I know will try to bring back my eating disorder, if that makes sense. So if I restrict, my eating disorder comes back. I've tried to go back to limiting, like eating 1,800 calories or 2,000 calories or anything like that, and as soon as that happens, I feel that sense to binge and purge. So I try to eat I try to get my fruits, I try to get my vegetables. I try to eat smaller portions and things like that, but it's hard when I'm still battling my eating disorder. So basically this video and this channel is just to try to document my experience along the way, give a different perspective of the not so glamorous side of gastric bypass and the hard struggles of it when you also have an eating disorder on top of it and a lot of things come up in life, and just hopefully provide some insight to other people that have similar issues, and hopefully form a little community for everyone else that is struggling.